Hello YouTube and welcome to the next route learning video. On today's video we're going to be revisiting the island line on the Isle of Wight, and I'm going to be driving the return journey for the very first route learning video I made for this channel. It's now 1 year since I started PTG Rail, and so I thought it would be fitting to drive the return journey along the island line. In addition to that, with the arrival of the new PC, I'm testing out the ability to make 60 frames per second videos for YouTube. If you haven't already, you should see 1080p 60 frames per second as an option in the quality settings. Unfortunately, recording videos in such a high frame rate isn't possible on the majority of routes, as they are too demanding for the system. However, the island line is not particularly demanding, and so I've been able to record this video with a higher frame rate than usual. On today's journey, we're going to be taking a Network Southeast Class 483 from Shanklin to Ryde Pier Head on an early morning service. Along the way, we will be calling at Lake, Sandown, Brading, Ryde St John's Road, Ryde Esplanade, and finally Ryde Pier Head. The total distance for the journey is around 8 1/3 miles. The Class 483 units are originally London Underground tube stock dating back to 1938, which makes them the oldest trains in use on the British railway network. They were in service with London Underground from 1938 to 1989, when they were then moved to the Island Line to replace even older London Underground stock. The units were manufactured by Metro Camel and are formed of 2 coaches. They weigh 55 tonnes each and have a maximum power output of 670 horsepower. The maximum speed of each unit is 45 miles per hour. Once in the cab of the Class 483, the only thing that I need to do to set up ready for departure is to move the reversing handle into the forward position, which I've now done. And now just to the right of the reversing handle here you can see the power handle, which has 3 steps of power: shunt, series and parallel. So you would use shunt up until you're doing around 2 to 3 miles per hour, and then step up the power handle to series up until you're doing around 10 to 15 miles per hour, before then finally stepping up to parallel, which will take us up to the full line speed. One of the things to note with this power handle is that if you want to step down, say from parallel to series, then what you would need to do is you would need to move the power handle all of the way back to the off position before then moving it back up to the series position. Another thing to note is that there is a dead man's handle on here, though it's not simulated in Train Simulator. So as you move the handle round, you'll see that it's also depressed downwards. And that's to simulate the dead man's handle as it was when most trains had them, in fact. And of course these trains still have them today. And that's simply that the handle has to be depressed at all times when the train is moving, and if the driver was to lift his hand from that, the emergency brakes would be applied. And the simple reason for that is just a safety mechanism to make sure that the driver was alert and alive. So if there was any medical emergency, for example, and the driver had a problem, then if his hand depressed, the train would come to a stop. So just to the left of the reversing handle we have the brake handle here, which is just a very simple brake, just operates up and down, and the further you move it to the right, the harder the brakes are applied. Just down here we have the speedometer, which is actually quite difficult to see on this train. Even with the FOV set where it is, I still find that you can't see all of the controls when driving. Now to look up here we have the brake gauges, and the main gauge that we want to look at is the top gauge, and that indicates the brake cylinder pressure and how hard the brakes are applied. So I would normally try not to go above 40 on the brake cylinder pressure gauge when driving, but unfortunately I won't actually be able to see this gauge when driving due to the position that I've got to have the camera. As you can see here, I need to be able to see the speedometer, and as a result I won't actually be able to read the brake gauge. So I've had to take note of the position of the brake handle to know how hard the brakes are being applied, and so normally I don't want to move it much beyond the position where it's pointing directly towards me, so just slightly to the right of that, and that is roughly 40 on the brake cylinder pressure gauge. One final thing to demonstrate is the horn, which is actually a whistle on this train, which sounds like so, and I believe it's standard on all London Underground trains to have this whistle style horn. Now that I've gone through the cab, we're pretty much ready to depart. Departing Shanklin, the starting speed limit is 15 miles per hour, and we've got around 1 mile to go to the next stop, which is Lake. Just coming up now is an increase in the speed limit to 45 miles per hour, though I'm going to shut off the power just for a moment, just to ensure that we don't end up breaking the speed limit. And now that we've passed that house on the right hand side, I can now accelerate up towards 45 miles per hour, as I can be sure that the rear of the train has passed the speed board. Along here in a moment, the gradient's going to start going down at 1 in 88, which will cause the train to accelerate more. So I'm going to idle the power at just above 35 miles per hour and allow the train to gradually coast up towards 45. I'm now idling the power at this point, and I'm just going to allow the train to coast from here towards Lake Station. When I was trying to choose a scenario for this video, I actually settled upon this scenario just because I really actually like the atmosphere that this light level gives. I wouldn't want it any darker because then it would be too dark and it wouldn't be an interesting enough video to watch probably. I do find generally that nighttime scenarios aren't the best to put on YouTube just because there really isn't a lot to see. But I really like the atmosphere here and the way that everything's still slightly silhouetted. And I just felt it would make a good scenario for this video. I'm now going to apply the brakes for Lake Station just after this foot crossing which we just crossed there. So I'm now braking for the stop, which is coming up just ahead. And we're going on the downhill gradient all of the way into Lake. I'm not sure of the exact stopping point here for a 2-coach train, so I'm just going to release the brakes momentarily and head towards the end of the platform. Here we are, arrival at Lake. Departing Lake, the starting speed limit is 45 miles per hour, and we've got around 3/4 of a mile to go to the next stop, which is Sandown. The gradient is now level along this section of track, and what I'm looking out for next is a signal with a whistle board, and at that point we've got just over 1/4 of a mile to go to a speed reduction down to 15 miles per hour. And the 15 mile per hour speed limit comes into force just before we arrive at Sandown. And coming up shortly, we're actually going to be on a down 1 in 80 gradient just after this signal coming up just here. And at that point I'm then going to idle the power and allow the train to coast, so we're starting to go downhill now. And what I'm looking out for now is a Morpeth board warning of the upcoming 15 limit, and at that point I'm then going to apply the brakes. So we've just reached the Morpeth board now, and so I'm now applying the brakes for the upcoming 15 speed limit. The limit's going down to 15 just after this signal just here. Just going to move the view down slightly as I realised I couldn't see the speedometer low enough. And now you can see I've slowed to around 12 miles per hour at this point, so I'm just going to give it a small amount of power to bring the speed up slightly. And you can see the platform at Sandown Station coming up just ahead. I need to take note at this point that we currently have a red signal at the end of the platform. So I'm going to slow down a bit more just to drive with caution here, and I'm aiming to stop just beyond the shelter on our left. Departing Sandown, the starting speed limit is 15 miles per hour, and we've got just over 1¾ miles to go to the next stop, which is Brading. Now that we've reached 15 miles per hour, I've shut off the power to allow the train to coast and ensure that we don't break the speed limit. The speed limit in a moment will be going up to 45 miles per hour once again, just after we've crossed this point and entered the single track section. So the speed limit's now going up to 45, and I can accelerate just beyond this orange thing under the track. I'm not actually sure what they are. I don't know if anyone can help me with that. I've seen them a lot on the railway, but I've never been quite sure what the orange tube that runs under the rails is for. So yeah, if you do know, then please do let me know in the comments. At this point I'm now accelerating up towards 45 miles per hour, but I'm going to idle the power in a moment, as we're going downhill presently on a 1 in 77 downward gradient. As you can see, the train is still gathering speed, and so I am still accelerating towards 45 with the power off. I need to keep an eye on the speed at this point so that I use the brakes if necessary to control the speed as we get up towards 45. The gradient will be levelling at some point along here, though I'm not sure the exact point, so I'm trying to look out for that and keep an eye on our speed. The next landmark that I'm looking out for along here is a Morpeth board warning of an upcoming 20 mile per hour speed restriction. At this point I'm just using the brakes just to point out, as we were getting up to 45 and the train was trying to accelerate above that. So yeah, I'm looking out for a Morpeth board for an upcoming 20 mile per hour speed restriction, which is 1/3 of a mile from the speed limit itself, and the 20 limit comes into force just before our stop at Brading. I believe the gradient has levelled out now, as the speed doesn't seem to be going up above 40, so I'm just going to allow us to coast at this point, and you can now see the Morpeth board is coming up just here. And what I'm looking out for now is a small milepost on the right hand side, and I'm going to brake just after that. So I'm now applying the brakes for the upcoming 20 limit. Looks like I've slowed down slightly too much, slightly too quickly there, so I've just released the brakes momentarily. And now the 20 limit is coming up just here. Now coming into a stop at Brading, I'm aiming to stop just at the end of the platform roof on the left. Departing Brading, the starting speed limit is 20 miles per hour, and we've got around 3½ miles to go to the next stop, which is Ryde St John's Road. As we get to 20 miles per hour, I'm now going to idle the power and allow the train to coast at this point until we get a further increase in the speed limit. And there is indeed an increase in the speed limit to 40 miles per hour just before the overbridge you can see coming up. So we'll pass the board first, and then I can accelerate just before passing under the overbridge. So we've now passed the 40 board, and I can now at this point accelerate up towards 40 miles per hour. In a moment we're going to be going uphill on a 1 in 127 gradient, which will actually affect our ability to accelerate. But beyond that, it will also mean that it's difficult to maintain speed once we reach 40 miles per hour due to the way that this power handle works. Indeed, at this speed, you basically got on or off, because if you're in shunt mode or series mode, you'll get no power at all to help us maintain speed, and it's only in parallel where I'm going to have power. So what I'm going to have to do is just keep moving the power handle on and off to try and sort of balance the speed out, which is going to be difficult. And so as you can see, we're now reaching 40 miles per hour. At this point I'm shutting the power handle off, and once the train slows to around 35, I'm then going to put the power handle all of the way back on again. So I've put the power handle back on again to bring us up towards 40, and then once we reach 40, I'm once again going to have to shut off the power handle and just keep doing that while we're on this gradient. I'm also looking out for along here now a 45 mile per hour speed board. In fact, we've just reached that now, so I can stay in full power as the speed limit has gone back up to 45. And at this point we've got 2 1/3 miles to go to Ryde St John's Road. At present we're on the steepest gradient here, which is the 1 in 78 upward gradient. And so the train is really struggling to accelerate up towards 45 miles per hour. The gradient will be levelling out shortly and then going down again before levelling out once again. So I've really got to keep an eye on the speed along here at this point. It looks like that the gradient has now changed, so I'm just shutting off the power and applying the brakes slightly just to bring the speed down below 45, so I can keep a closer eye on the speedometer. Now it looks like the downward gradient is starting just here, so I'm going to have to use the brakes to control the speed. The next thing I'm looking out for along here now is a warning for an upcoming 30 mile per hour speed restriction. The 30 warning is 1/3 of a mile from the limit itself. So we're now passing the 30 mile per hour speed warning. I'm going to apply the brakes as we enter this next left curve just here. I'm now slowing for the 30 limit, which is at just the other end of this platform here at Smallbrook Junction. And I'm now down to 30 just in time for passing the 30 board. The speed limit is now going back up to 45 miles per hour, and so I can accelerate on this point here, and I'm going straight back up to full power to accelerate up towards that now. What I'm looking out for next is a 20 mile per hour speed warning, which is 1/3 of a mile from our stop. We're now passing the 20 mile per hour speed warning, so I'm looking out for our stop just ahead. I'm going to shut off the power at this point and apply the brakes just as we reach this semaphore signal here. Ryde Depot is on the right hand side, and you can see Ryde St John's Road station here just coming up. I wasn't sure of the exact stopping point for a 2-coach train, so I'm just going to aim to stop around the end of the platform. Departing Ryde St John's Road, the starting speed limit is quickly going down to 20 miles per hour, as you can see here, and we've got just over 3/4 of a mile to go to the next stop, which is Ryde Esplanade. So I'm just going to bring our speed up to 20 miles per hour before cutting off the power, as I have done now, and just allowing the train to coast along here. We will shortly be going through a tunnel, which is Ryde Tunnel, and we're going to be going downhill into the tunnel on a gradient as steep as 1 in 61. So I need to keep an eye out for where that gradient starts, because once we're on that gradient, I am then going to need to use the brakes to control our speed on the descent. We are now going downhill, and it looks like that I just accidentally let the train slip up there to around 21 or 22 miles per hour for a few seconds. But I caught it quite quickly, and I've managed to bring our speed back down to below 20. Now I'm just going to try and use the brakes in a manner to control the speed until the gradient levels out. The gradient does change at some point in this tunnel, but unfortunately I won't be able to see where that is, so I've just got to keep a close eye on the speedometer. I've just released the brakes now, in fact, and it looks like that the gradient may have already leveled out, as we're not gaining any speed at this point. So I'm just going to give it a small amount of power now to try and bring the speed back up towards 20. As we get towards the end of the tunnel, we're now going to start on an uphill gradient at 1 in 93, so I now need to give us some power to try and prevent too much speed loss as we climb out of here. At this point, even though we've got 2 tracks all of the way to the end of the pier, it's only the one track that is in use, which is the one that we're currently on, once we've crossed this point here. So I'm now shutting off the power. As you can see, Ryde Esplanade station is just coming up. Again, I wasn't sure of the exact correct stopping point, so I'm just aiming to stop near the end of the roof. Departing Ryde Esplanade, the starting speed limit is 20 miles per hour, and we've got just over 1/3 of a mile to go to the end of the pier to Ryde Pier Head station. So I'm just going to bring our speed up to 20 once again, and I'm going to coast all of the way into our stop, and I won't need to use any more power from this point. So the section between the Esplanade and the Pier Head is the only section of this route that I've been on in real life. I visited the Isle of Wight a couple of times, but unfortunately haven't had chance to have a ride on the railway yet properly, so I'm hoping to do that at some point in the future. I think it would be quite an enjoyable journey to go on. But certainly I must say the trains are quite rickety on this old pier, and I quite enjoyed the journey even though it's really short. I really do hope that you've noticed also in this video just how much better it looks when you can watch it in 60 frames a second. As I said, it's a shame that I can't do it with more routes, but unfortunately it's just not possible with the majority of routes. One other route I think I can do this on will be Edinburgh to Glasgow. Oh, and possibly Settle to Carlisle as well, so I'm going to do a bit of experimenting and see what I can do. You probably noticed there that the speed limit dropped to 15 miles per hour entering the station here, and so I slowed to 15 just before that. And so I should now be stopping in about the right place. I'm going to stop just a bit clear here of what, well, they would be buffers normally, but they don't look like buffers to me. Anyway, thank you very, very much for watching this video. I really do hope that you've enjoyed it, and as I said, I hope that you appreciate the graphical quality as well, especially when you can watch a video at 60 frames a second. Please don't forget that for the latest updates you can find me on Facebook, the link of which is in the description of this video. Once again, thank you for watching.